Welcome to the first ever Cheap Seats Casual Friday, where we get rid of the jacket and tie of objectivity and throw on the sweatpants of subjectivity. Because, let's be honest, it's just less work, and it allows for more fun. Today I'm going to be talking potential names for the new Seattle NHL team, because we still don't have a name as they keep delaying it, and even though this may not be the most interesting subject to most people, this is a new channel and I'm not going to get a lot of views anyway, so I might as well do what I want. And although there are more interesting unknowns about the team, like who the coach or players are going to be, we're still quite a ways off from realistically being able to look at that, even though you can go on Cap Friendly and mess around with it. But let's be honest, a lot of those players aren't going to be on the teams they're on now, and a lot of those contracts are going to change over the next year. Real quick though, before we get into the potential names, let's just all be honest with ourselves for a second. Regardless of your opinions, there really is nothing objective about any of these names and which one is better than the other. And whether or not the team is named the Crap Weasels, the Bitch Pigeons, the Sakais, or the Kraken, in 20 years you won't be able to imagine the team being called anything other than what it is, and you'll go to the games and chant their name regardless. So with all that said, let's quickly get caught up. Before the team was even announced to be an official expansion team, they had said that they had been brainstorming all along and had narrowed down 700 potential names they'd come up with to 100, and then eventually a list of 13 names of domains that they had registered was released. Now, while it is very possible, and at this point I almost think it is a toss-up whether or not the name that they eventually pick is even on this list, we're just going to, for the sake of time, stick to those 13 names. The one thing we do know is that at this point, they've narrowed it down to a final 5 names that are in a time capsule by the Space Needle, and we won't get to find out what those 5 are until many years after we already know what the team name is. And with that in mind, I'm going to quickly pare this list down to the 5 that I think are most likely in that capsule off this list. If they are on this list. The only other thing we know is that the team has said that they want it to be representative of the Northwest, and whether or not they stick to that and what representative of the Northwest even means is also up for debate. But we'll take their word for it and run with that. So with that in mind, let's get down to it. Cougars or mountain lions are the only big cats that are native to the Northwest, at least as far as I know, so it makes sense from that front, which is probably why Wazoo has it as their mascot. Bald eagles are also native to the Northwest, but while Seattle does have a fan base that is passionate enough to wait 52 years for a championship, I just don't think we have it in us to throw snowballs at Santa Claus. Firebirds is way too close to Seattle's already existing WHL team, the Thunderbirds, and it's just not as cool of a name anyway. Plus, at this point, we know that they've already applied for a trademark and gotten turned down for it as the name of the AHL team. I'm just going to go ahead and lump sea lions and seals into the same thing because, let's be honest, they're just not that different as far as a team name goes. And while I do like a name that has a nod to the past, I don't like it if it's another city's past and it's a past of failure. The Rainiers is already the name of the Mariners' AAA affiliate, so... Now, granted, there have been some recent stirrings that the Renegades might still be alive as a potential team name, but to be honest, if this is one of the final 13, I do not know how they managed to come up with almost 700 names worse than this one. It seems like a name that a bunch of 10-year-olds came up with for their Little League baseball team, and on top of that, it is the only one that I can't even find a stretch reason that it would have anything to do with the Northwest. So as far as that's concerned, they would totally strike out there. Granted, there are a number of whale species that call the waters outside of Seattle home from time to time. The name just seems like they wanted to go with killer whales but knew they couldn't because it was part of Vancouver's logo. And it's also still just a little too close to the Whalers as a name, so I don't see this one. So that leaves us with the Emeralds, the Evergreens, the Kraken, the Sakais, and the Totems. Now, there are 2 of those 5 that I think are much less likely to be the final name than the other 3, so I'm going to start with those 2. First off, the Emeralds. Honestly, I don't hate it. I mean, granted, it might make you think of jewelry first, and that isn't necessarily the most badass thing ever, but consider this. It is the gemstone or birthstone or whatever of May, and that is the second month of the playoffs, which is when we're trying to figure out who's going to the Stanley Cup. And if that's somewhere we find ourselves often, I'm okay with that. And as far as why Seattle is the Emerald City and Washington is the Evergreen State, well, that's because we have a lot of trees. Evergreen trees. Evergreen trees. And I know a lot of people want to stick with the colors of green and red from the old Metropolitan team, so maybe you could have a logo that's like a red S with a tree on it. I don't think anyone's done that before, right? In the end, though, I just don't think the Seattle Evergreens really runs off the tongue that well or offers itself as a great name for a professional sports team, so this is probably the least likely to me. With the Metropolitans being eliminated as a team name, or at least it seems like it anyway because of the Metropolitan Division, the nod to the past team name is the Totems, who were a WHL team in Seattle for 31 years, and still remain to this day, to some extent, a part of the community. It's a team that even at one point beat the Russian Red Army team in their prime. And you might have heard that the totem pole isn't actually a native thing to Seattle, which to some extent is true. Totem poles actually originate from Alaskan tribes, and it wasn't until a Seattle businessman who wanted to make Seattle the gateway to Alaska went and stole one from what he thought was an abandoned village and brought it back to Seattle that they really became an icon of the city, to a point where after that the local Salish tribes started to work them into their buildings. So no, they didn't originate from around here, but yes, the local tribes have been carving them for at least almost 100 years, and they are now a lasting part of that culture, so make of that what you will. As far as I'm concerned, as long as they're in good communications with the local tribes, which it seems like they have been to this point, I really like this name, and if they go anything close to what the old logo and colors used to be, I don't think it gets much better than that. The Kraken is probably the most divisive name on this list, and if you're someone who likes the more classic old-timey sounding names that lack creativity, this is definitely not the best choice. And I do understand that it offers itself to some non-ideal from an organizational perspective slang terms like the crackheads or the crack house, but if you're going to just try and avoid every single name based on what it could potentially be twisted into by opposing fans, you might as well just call the team the Seattle Humans. Now, I've also heard it argued that this is not a good name because it has nothing to do with the Seattle area, and all that does is prove to me that those people know about as much about the Seattle area as they can glean from the shots of Seattle coming back from commercial breaks on Seahawks games. Seattle has been a long-time home to one of the largest Scandinavian populations in the entire US, which is the mythology that the Kraken comes from. Now I grant you that that is by itself a little bit of a loose tie to Seattle, but the Puget Sound is also home to the biggest species of octopus in the world, so as far as I'm concerned, the name fits this area just as well as the Eagles, the Cougars, or any of those fishy names. Plus, for what it's worth of any of the names on this list, I think this one is easily the best, or at least lends itself the best to any kind of pre-game on-ice projections that they could do, and definitely has some pretty cool marketing possibilities. Finally, the Sakais, which was an early and a long-time favorite as the potential name for the franchise, but recently it seems like it might be more unlikely that this is going to be the name, as there is a local adult book writer who has that name already copyrighted. And I'm no lawyer, but as far as I understand it, the team could still take the name and operate it with it as long as they didn't want to print any books. But even at that, it seems like this lady has been very willing to talk to the team if they have interest in using the name. But at least up until recently, we know they have not been in contact with her, which makes me think that they're just trying to avoid any potential messy situations, which could be the death sentence for the Sakais as a name. Plus, even if they did want to cooperate, they may not even want to associate themselves with a adult series of books. There are questions, though, of whether or not the NHL would even allow the name based on the double entendre of fighting that it kind of portrays, and the fact that the NHL has worked hard to get away from that past, for better or for worse, whether you like it or not. Personally, I've never really been a fan of this name because the idea of a logo of a fish with boxing gloves makes me want to throw up. And while there are some logos that I have liked from this potential team name, it's still just a small fish whose main purpose in life is to be food. Speaking of which, I know I'm not alone among Seattle sports fans who are tired of seeing the throwing fish during every other commercial break of any nationally televised Seahawks game, and a name like Sakais could only make that worse. So what do I think the team name is going to be? Honestly, I have no idea. Even with them constantly hinting at this list of names, it seems just as likely that it isn't going to be one of these names as that it is going to be. But assuming it is one of these names, probably either the Kraken or the Totems. It just seems like at this point Sakais is more hurdles than they are willing to jump over. And personally, I'm kind of hoping it's the Kraken, but I'd be happy with any of the names. Just don't be the Renegades, and please don't be black and red.